Chapter 15. Suspicions. What's going on? Yvonne ran down the last tier of stairs to join several uniformed officers in the station lobby. Vehicle sirens cut through the chatter as they headed out. "Attempted abduction, ma'am," a female officer called back, adjusting her earpiece. "Where?" "Garth Owen, 2 small boys. We're going to do a sweep and interview them." "We'll follow on," Yvonne called back, already returning upstairs to find Dewi. She found him drinking a coffee and pulled a face. "Oh, sorry, Dewi, you won't have time to drink that. We've got to go." Dewi's disappointment was quickly replaced by expectancy. "Ma'am?" "Attempted abduction. Old Garth Owen." Dewi needed no further prompting. Parking the car, they could see through the throng of officers, parents, children and onlookers. Yvonne pursed her lips. "We'll have our work cut out." "Leave it to me, ma'am." Dewi puffed himself up as he shut the car door. Straightening his jacket, he strode over to the ever-increasing crowd and flashed his badge. A pathway opened up as people moved back, still craning their necks. A young PC scribbled into his notebook as he asked questions of a man and a woman who stood next to a young boy with a blanket around his shoulders. Yvonne stepped forward. "May I?" she directed at the officer. He nodded and flicked his notebook closed. "Sorry, do you mind taking statements from the other witnesses? I want to talk to the boy and his parents." A look of exasperation was quickly suppressed. He opened his notebook again. Yvonne turned to the parents of the young boy. "I'm DI Yvonne Giles. Is there somewhere we can go?" The female nodded and pointed to a house in the middle of the row facing the road. "We live there. I'm Helen Thomas and this is my husband Jack. Zach is our little boy. He's had a heck of a fright." Yvonne estimated Helen and Jack to be in their early 30s. "How old is your son, Mrs. Thomas?" "He's 8. Helen Thomas pushed open the gate to their small front garden and led the way down the path. She turned every couple of seconds to check on Zach, who was close behind her. Dewi followed, and Jack Thomas brought up the rear. There were no flowers in the garden, no frills of any kind, just grass and a pathway. Simple, but tidy. Helen pushed open her front door and led them through to a tiny hallway to her kitchen at the front of the house. She put the kettle on and adjusted the elastic band holding her ponytail. Jack Thomas held his son, who was still wrapped in the pale blue blanket. "Hello, Zach." Yvonne's voice was soft as she sat at the oblong kitchen table. She glanced at Dewi, checking he was ready to get everything down in his notepad. "I heard you had quite a fright." Zach nodded, pressing himself into his father's stomach. "Can you tell us what happened?" The boy looked up at his father, who smiled and squeezed him. "Go on, they're going to find the men who grabbed you." Zach squirmed, his face reddening. "How many men were there, Zach?" Yvonne asked. She decided simple prompts would be best. 2. He shuffled inside the blanket. "Can you tell me what they looked like?" He shook his head. "What colour hair did they have?" "Brown, I think." "Okay. What did they do?" "One of the men grabbed me." The corners of his mouth turned down as though he was about to cry. "It's okay, Zach." Yvonne tilted her head. "It must have been frightening." She gave him a moment before continuing. "What was he wearing? Can you remember?" Zach shook his head. "What colour was his top? Can you remember that?" "Green. I think it was green." He nodded for emphasis and was rewarded with a big smile. "That's brilliant. That is very useful, Zach. Can you remember the colour of his trousers?" He screwed up his face. Black, I think." Okay. So you think they were black trousers? Would you say they were definitely dark?" "Yes." He appeared more sure of that. Yvonne got off her chair to kneel in front of the boy. "Can you show me how he grabbed you?" Zach looked up at his father before taking a step forward and placing a hand on each of the DI's shoulders. His fingers dug in. "What happened then?" "Michael shouted at him to get off me." "Michael? Who is Michael?" "My friend." Yvonne glanced at Jack And Helen, her eyebrows raised. Michael lives a few doors down. He's 9, was playing with Zach at the time. Dewi rose from his seat. I'll see if I can find him. With that, Dewi left. Yvonne turned back to Zach. Did the man say anything to you? He said I'd taken his papers. He told me I had to go with him to the police. What papers did he mean, Zach? I don't know. Did he have a car? A van. He got into a van with the other man. What colour was the van? Can you remember? White. I think it was white. Dewi returned with another young boy. Michael? Yvonne asked as they approached. The boy nodded. How old are you? 9.5. He stood tall, hands on hips. Did you see what happened? He nodded again. I saw the man grab Zach. He was pulling him. I shouted at him to stop. What did the man look like? Can you remember? He was tall, with brown hair. He had a badge on his jumper. What colour was his jumper? Green. Dark green, I think. I see. It had a red thing on it, kind of like a planet. He rubbed his cheek. Where was the planet? Can you draw it for us? I'll get some paper and a pen. Helen squeezed past the boy. It's okay. Dewi turned the page in his notebook and passed it and his pen to the boy. You can draw it in here. Michael took the pen and drew the rough outline of a jumper on the page. On the top left corner, he drew what looked like the planet Saturn. The planet was in red, he said, screwing up his nose. There were letters underneath. I don't know what those were. Dewi pursed his lips. I think I know that logo. He took the pad back from the boy and redrew the planet with the name Scion underneath. Does that look like what you saw? Michael nodded. That's what it was. What happened when you shouted at the man? Yvonne asked. He went back to the other man who was standing by their van. They both got in and they drove off. They left. Did you see any registration number? Michael shook his head. I'm sorry. He hung his head. Hey. Yvonne put a gentle hand on his arm. You did great. She flicked a look to Zach and back. You both did. We have a lot to go on, and we are going to find and speak to these men and make sure this doesn't happen again. Okay? Both boys nodded. Thank you. Yvonne held out her hand to Helen and Jack. You've been very helpful. Then looking back at the two boys, added, Come down to the station sometime and we'll show you around, and you can have a sit in the police cars. Would you like that? She was awarded with 2 big smiles. Where are we headed? Dewi, Yvonne called as they ran back to the car. Where are we headed, Dewi? Yvonne called as they ran back to the car. We're off to the St. Giles Business Park, Mum, the other side of town. A tech firm called Scion have their offices there. I'm pretty sure that's what the boys described. It was Scion's company sweatshirt. Yvonne shot into her seat. Let's go. Dewi put the blue light on the dash and set off the siren in brief bursts as they headed down New Road. Even so, it was a long slog to get through. Once past the traffic lights, there was more room, and Dewi put his foot down. Passing the St. Giles Golf Club, he cut right into the business park, driving on until he reached the unit that housed Scion's offices. The logo the boys had described was prominently displayed on the company sign. Dewi pulled into a space marked reserved. He turned to give the DI a wink. Nice of them to keep it for me. Yvonne grinned. Just before we go in, Dewi's face was serious once more. The CEO is Darren Byrne. This is the 2nd or 3rd startup he's had over the years. A few years ago, he was prosecuted for attempted fraud, and the company he ran, supplying electronic equipment, folded. He made a lot of the old locals unhappy as they lost money. They lost the money they'd invested in shares. I think he was bankrupted. 4 years later, and he's back, like a bad penny. The DI pursed her lips. And the fraud? What was all that about? If I remember rightly, he was claiming that his equipment was capable of a lot more than it was. People were paying way over the odds for junk. So the man's got previous. Yvonne placed her hands on her hips, reading the sign aloud. Scion, we are electronics. Excuse me? A youngish man in a dark grey suit and red tie frowned at them from the doorway. I'm afraid you can't park there. The public parking places are across the way. He pointed away from them. Debbie flashed his warrant card. DS Debbie Hughes, Dyfed Powys Police, and this is D.I. Giles. The guy in the suit paused, running a hand through his short, dark hair. He flicked a glance behind him before turning back. What do you want? Yvonne noticed his fists clenched by his sides. We'd like to speak with the CEO of Scion, if he's here. She regarded him with a steady gaze, suspecting that she was looking at him. He shifted position, as though unsure what to say next. What do you want with him? He gave her a stern look. Come on, Darren, let us in, Derry sighed. Byrne looked around him, as though seeking reassurance from somewhere. What have I done now? He frowned and placed his hands in his trousers pocket. We'd just like to ask you a couple of questions, if we could. Can we come inside? Although she would never have said, Yvonne was feeling the chill, and her feet and head ached. She suspected she might be coming down with something. I don't have to let you in, he scowled. Do you have a reason not to? Her raised pitch betrayed her surprise. I'm busy, we've got a lot on. Whose space have we taken? She walked towards him, using her hand to indicate the reserved parking spot. My deputy, Carl. Is he not here, then? No, he's out negotiating a large order with a client. I see. He indicated for them to follow him, leading them into the office atrium, a light, airy space with oversized pot plants and a leather seating area, beyond which was a large and shiny reception bar in red, topped with black granite. The young woman seated behind it was busy on the telephone. As he passed her, Byrne demanded, Hold my calls. What does Scion do, Mr. Byrne? Yvonne pulled out one of the chairs in front of his glass desk and turned to look through the window at the wooded landscaping at the edge of the grounds. Derry sat next to her. We supply electronic goods and control systems. Byrne sat behind his desk and took a sip from a glass of water resting on it. Yvonne turned back to regard his angular features. She noticed his chin was crooked, pointing a little to the left. What sort of electronic goods? Everything from school computer systems to home gaming setups and industrial control software. If we don't have it, and you need it, we'll get it. She nodded. Where were you at 3:30 this afternoon? 3:30? He looked up at the ceiling, screwing his face up. Yvonne shot a glance at Derry. I was out with Carl, delivering posters and brochures to local businesses. Yvonne cleared her throat. Which businesses? Where? He narrowed his eyes at her, as though weighing up his answer. A few businesses on the Mocktree Industrial Estate, Maldwin Sports Centre, Garthar newsagents. Did you interact with two small boys? No point in beating around the bush. What do you mean, interact? His mouth partially open, the DI could see his clenched teeth. Did you grab hold of an 8-year-old boy and tell him you were going to take him to the police? His eyes stared unblinking at her. His forehead creased in a frown. He chewed the inside of his cheek. I left some brochures on top of a wall outside of the shop on Garth Owen while I made a phone call. The kids came and started messing with them. One of them took some. So you grabbed him? Yvonne looked at him wide-eyed. Couldn't you have just asked him to put them back? I indicated it with my hand while I was still on the phone. The kid ignored me. He knocked them and a load fell to the pavement. I wasn't happy about it and I let him know it. He said you grabbed both of his shoulders and told him you wanted him to go with you to the police. Bit of an overreaction, wasn't it? Well, I didn't mean it. He placed both his hands out, palms up. They could see I was on the phone and they took advantage. They were 8 and 9 years old. Yvonne shook her head. Were you trying to abduct them? His face flushed, eyes bulging in their sockets. What? Of course I wasn't trying to abduct them. I just wanted to scare them. Have you heard of Bitcoin? Yes. He shook his head. Of course I have. Hasn't everybody? Ever traded in it? As a matter of fact, yes. I'm a modern entrepreneur. What's that got to do with anything? His eyes dared her to continue on this track. We may request some of your records. He leaned back in his chair. Fill your boots, but you'll need a warrant. As they left, Yvonne could see Byrne's reflection in the window. He was straight onto his mobile. Lisa's eyes sparkled. Her face flushed, knuckles white, as she fought to find the words to throw at him. Benton looked up from squeezing his tea bag with a spoon. "Want one?" he asked, trampling roughshod over her obvious emotion. "What right have you got to go through my stuff? It's not yours. Just because this house is in your name does not mean you can creep into our rooms whenever you feel like it." She scraped a chair out from under the kitchen table and plonked herself on it. "What were you looking for?" Benton finished pouring his milk and joined her at the table. "What makes you think it was me?" "Well, it was, wasn't it? You've done it before. Donna told me you went through her things." "When did she tell you that?" Benton looked nonplussed, casually taking a sip of his tea. "God damn it! Why do you always answer a question with another question?" She placed her elbows on the table and her head in her hands, mussing her hair in frustration. "I think I should wait for you to calm down." He made as though to rise from the table again. "A couple of weeks before she vanished, Donna told me you went through her things. She thought it was because she had dated you. I told her just because she'd dated you didn't give you the right to go through her stuff. And you don't even put things back the way you found them. That's what gives you away. You have no respect for other people's things." He shrugged. "I don't remember going through Donna's things, but if I did, it was probably because she borrowed something and I went to get it back. Anyway, we weren't really dating. I'm too old for her. She knew that." Lisa scowled at him, shaking her head. "What about me? I haven't borrowed anything from you. What's your excuse with me?" "Someone said you might be using drugs." "What? Who? What?" Lisa screwed up her face, shaking her head. "I'm not using. I've had the odd drag at a mate's house, but I don't use drugs. I don't bring stuff home." He shrugged again. "I heard a rumour, and I thought I'd better check. You know we'd lose the tenancy if this place was raided. It's a small town, a close-knit community. The neighbours talk." She folded her arms across her chest. "I don't believe you. What were you looking for?" Benton gulped back his tea. "You've got a locked suitcase in your room." Lisa tilted her head, eyes widening. "So? What's that got to do with anything?" "I was just wondering what was in it." "Is that what you were looking for? A key? Well, you won't find it." Benton sighed. "Why are you so angry with me? It's like you're blaming me for Donna's disappearance or something." "You see?" Lisa slapped her head down on the table. "You don't take responsibility. You basically admit to spying on me, and you're not even apologising. You're just turning it all back on me, as though it's all my fault. You're always creeping around. Either that, or you're on your computer all day. What do you even do on that thing? You're so clever, but you waste it all." Benton pulled a face, picking at a hole in his black t-shirt, his unwashed hair falling into his eyes. "Are you planning on leaving?" he asked eventually. "I can't." Lisa shook her head. "Not till Donna gets back. I can't just abandon her." "I miss her too, you know." He exhaled through pursed lips, puffing out both of his cheeks. "It's not the same here without her. We're all at each other's throats." As though to illustrate the point, loud music thundered down from the room above. Benton shot up and strode to the hall, looking up the stairs. "Turn that bloody music down, will you? We can't hear ourselves think." The volume upstairs halved. Benton sighed and took his empty mug to the sink, placing it on the side. Lisa frowned at it. "I'm not going to wash that up for you." Benton kicked at the cupboard and began swirling the mug, giving it a cursory squib of washing up liquid and a swish with a dish brush. "Happy?" he asked, his face contorted. He looked as though he would really like to hurt her. "I'm off." He pushed past her, and Lisa heard the front door bang on its catch. She put her head back in her hands and cried. Carantan checked both ways along the road as he left the block of flats. Movements unusually stiff, he lifted the box and carried it to the car. Though the air was chill, he could feel the sheen of perspiration under his arms and down his back. He looked up at the window, curtains drawn. He wet his lips and hoisted the box into the boot. He flipped through a few songs on the CD and switched it off. He hated them all. He drove the rest of the 12 miles to his home in silence. The porch lights should have felt welcoming. Instead, he was sweating nervously. With a deep exhalation, he grabbed his briefcase from the passenger footwell and locked the car. Marion would still be up, binge-watching one of her soaps, no doubt. He scowled in the darkness. Marion was not watching soaps. She was halfway through a glass of red wine and standing in their £30,000 kitchen, the half-finished bottle on the counter, suggesting this glass was not the first. She must have been running earlier in the evening, her blonde hair in a loose ponytail, and she still wore her jog pants and vest top. She looked up at the clock and back to her husband. Carantan set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. "I'm tired, Marion." His wife bit her lip, turning away so he would not see the tear escaping down her cheek. She placed the glass on the countertop with a trembling hand. "It's nearly 10 o'clock. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but he could make out every word. "We have a lot on," he shrugged. "We're working on something. It's complicated." "Were you really working?" She turned back to him, eyes half-lidded. His own eyes stared at the floor, flicking side to side. "Did you ring my office?" He didn't look up. "I was way too busy to answer. It's not the sort of work you can pause. You lose momentum." He thought about the box in the car. It felt like a millstone. Could she see how much his heart was pounding? She downed the rest of her wine, placing the empty glass in the sink. "I'm going to bed." As she passed, she did not look at him. He spent the night on the corner suite.